Dear church, let's talk more about when to leave. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined again by my good friend, Sam Dominguez. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I know it takes a little bit for you to get here and join us. Unlike me, you have a real job and, working on base here in Abilene. And so thank you so much for taking time out. A lot of what we talk about on the podcast when you're on here are things that we've discussed, outside of here when we are just shooting the breeze after church or whatever. And so this is a topic that we started last week, and I felt like there was still more to say. And I know you had a lot more that you had planned on saying, and so
well, the fact that we kept talking for about 10 minutes afterwards,
exactly,
there was probably more to say, yeah.
Which is very common for us. We do that quite often. But we talked last week about when to leave a church, kind of how to leave a church. We actually started with what to look for in a church so that you can be more proactive and rather than being reactive. But sometimes you do have to be reactive. Sometimes factors exist and persist that make it to where you don't feel comfortable with that congregation anymore. Or, maybe there's just some things out of your control that you decide, maybe my family would be better off somewhere else, worshiping somewhere else. You came from a culture growing up in California where, there wasn't necessarily a church on every street corner, whereas in the buckle of the Bible Belt right here in Abilene, used to be referred to as the Mecca of churches of Christ. There are several options, and that can be to one's detriment, I think, sometimes too. We don't really deal with issues or problems. We just decide, if I'm not happy here, even if it's the slightest thing, then I'll just hop over to another church. And we never really truly deal with issues as disciples are supposed to. So that was kind of what we talked about last week. I want to start this week by talking about what are the dangers of not leaving. You talked last week, and I thought it was a really good point, that if you're going to stay too long, that's okay. That's probably better than jumping too early. So make sure that you stayed too long and didn't jump too quick. But obviously there's a fine line there. So what are the dangers of staying somewhere too long in a place?
Well, I think we need to probably be clear that we're not talking about that there's going to be some line that you cross that suddenly God is going to be like, oh, well, you're still worshiping with those people? Well, you're out, Yeah. It's not one of those things where God's going to suddenly pull the rug out from under you, but it is a situation in which there are potential dangers, potential detriment to your faith, to your spirituality, just your spiritual health all around, and especially to that of your family. We talked about there being legitimate reasons why you might need to leave one congregation and join another. Obviously, we said it goes without saying doctrinal issues, but even with doctrinal issues, there's going to be a time in which you need to stay and fight the good fight. You need to try and be that influence toward the correct worship or whatever it is that needs to be put more in line with God's word. And there's a whole lot of people who spend a great deal of time just fighting that good fight. And then eventually it gets to the point where they can't do it anymore. It's difficult to look at a young family when there's no other kids in the congregation, or there's no kids that are the same age as your kids, and they spend their time in Bible class by themselves. And it's difficult to look at them and say, well, yeah, but you don't want to be a church shopper and try and go find one just because it has a good youth group or something. And say, well, yeah, but I want my kids to have Christian friends, and I want them to have an environment in which they can get to know other Christian kids in a positive and uplifting place. Yeah. There are going to be reasons why we need to go to other congregations, but as we stay, as we said, just a little bit longer, just to make sure that we have covered all the bases, make sure we've talked to the people we need to talk to, and make sure we're not just pulling the eject button a little too fast, there's always the danger that the difficulties are going to build up on you. Mm-hmm. They start to weigh down on you. They start to pile up. The relationships that you don't want to damage become closer. They become longer lasting, and that just makes it all the harder to try and go away from those relationships. Of course, what we are trying to get across is that just because you go to another congregation doesn't mean you've ended those relationships, right? Because you still have responsibilities towards those people. But it's always going to be difficult if you're going to, be spending your worship time and your study time somewhere else. But the longer you persist in what I would call a dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional worship environment, a dysfunctional congregation, the harder it is to pull away, and the more likely it is that your faith is going to become intrinsically damaged. And I mean, it will be more difficult to know the good from the bad. We see that in our personal relationships all the time, where you spend enough time in a dysfunctional relationship, you don't even recognize what a good relationship would really be like. And we can do that in the church. We can do that by being a part of a dysfunctional family for so long that we then go to another congregation and we don't even know what to expect. We get suspicious when the preacher wants to come over and talk to us. We get suspicious when the elders want to get to know us. And no, they're trying to do their job. They're trying to shepherd. They're trying to form good relationships with you. And I think probably in the worst case scenario, and I'm sure you have more experience, direct experience with this, is eventually people can get to the point where they start losing their faith, because they look at this one dysfunctional congregation and it starts to represent the church as a whole. And it's like, well, if this is what God has to offer, if this is what God's people are really like, then I don't want any part of that. And that's the real danger of, one, being a dysfunctional congregation, and two, staying at one to your personal detriment.
Yeah, we come across a lot of folks that have been wounded. They've been bruised, they've been hurt for whatever reason, and they come our way, and you're trying to help them to heal and also giving them a soft place to land. We talk about dysfunction, we talk about, doctrinal error and things of that nature, and we mentioned this a little bit last week, and this is treading on some shaky soil for some people, but I do believe, and you can disagree with me, but there are some churches that probably need to close. And it's not that they're doing anything terribly wrong. It's not that they're, teaching things that are false or anything like that. It's just they've tried to hold on to something that's no longer there. I've said this before. I think a church can begin without elders, but I think they need to be moving towards that. And if you're a church that's existed for 30 years without elders, that's not the scriptural way to function. And if there's no plan to add elders, things like that would be an instance of, if possible, closing your doors and going, to the church closer. Like you said, your culture you grew up and your wife grew up in, closer might have been 50 miles, so that does make it difficult. But, there are extenuating circumstances, and it's not exactly black and white, cut and dry always. But sometimes, you've tried to keep something alive that just isn't alive anymore. And we've had people come our way that have been in those situations where they were in a dying congregation and it was sad, but they're like, we're just not getting fed anymore. And it wasn't that what we were being fed was false. We weren't being fed. And that would be an instance that those things are dicey, but I do think that they exist.
Congregations need to, I would say, regularly, and this is, of course, the beauty of God's design. That's why there's shepherds. That's why there is this spiritual leadership. We should be constantly looking back and saying, okay, why are we here?
Right.
What are we doing here? And a lot of times, if the best reason we have for existing as a congregation is because we always have, it's like, well, we have a great history of existence, a long tradition of existence, that's not a good reason to stay as a congregation. We need to be looking and say, okay, are we able to meet people's needs? Are we able to evangelize? Are we able to bring people closer to God? Or are we just kind of running out the lease on our building because we've got a building? Right. And, a lot of these things, like you said, it's not a question of whether we're doing wrong. But it can be a question of, but are we doing the work of the church? Are we successfully being who God wants us to be? And that's not to promote the idea of, well, all congregations should consolidate into some massive super congregation. That also can be a situation in which we say, okay, we're not functioning anymore. We're not able to be the type of people that we need to be. But there are lots of smaller congregations that, due to really no fault of their own, it's just changing circumstances. People move, things change, people get older, businesses close down and the
town
jobs
dies.
go to, towns die. And there are times when, if you're the last stand, if you are the only congregation for miles, then yeah, you might need to stay as that outpost. But if there is another good option, if there's another sound congregation that people can go and be a part of, then it behooves us to say, look, for our own spiritual well-being and to ensure that we can actually be a part of a functional congregation, we should probably all go over here. Or, there might be more than one option. To say, the time has come when we're not able to fulfill really all the obligations of a congregation, and it would be better for us if we went and participated in a congregation that can.
Absolutely.
And then be an active part of that congregation.
Yes. Yeah. Just fulfilling the mandate to meet together is not what it's all about, and I think sometimes we think that, we're still meeting. We've met here for 150 years. We can't close down now. No, I mean, you might can, depending on what is the function of the church. Just because you're meeting together doesn't mean you're alive, and sometimes it's hard to, almost always it's hard to come around to the idea that maybe we're not alive. Maybe we're not a living congregation like we need to be. And so we join forces with a congregation that is, and that's a tough thing to make that decision to close your doors. Especially you hear sometimes, well, my great granddaddy built this building, and we get tied to the structure and maybe the mandate to meet, and not so much, well, what does it mean to be an active participant? What does it mean to be a functional church member?
Functional congregations exist in the present.
Mm-hmm.
We might have a great past, we might have a great tradition, or we might have a bad one that we have come out of, and we simply don't know what the future is going to hold. And so a functional congregation exists in the present moment. And if you as a congregation are not able to fulfill your obligations, if you're not able to be an edifying place, if you can't, keep a man in the pulpit, if you can't provide elders, if you can't do just kind of the basic groundworks of being a functional congregation in the moment,
right,
then all the history that is associated with your congregation doesn't alleviate that. Right. To say, well, we were a sound congregation 10 years ago, well, okay, so you were. Mm-hmm. But the church has to exist in the present, and we need to always be open to the idea that we may have come from strength, we may have come from weakness, but all that matters is what we're doing right now.
Yeah, appreciate the past, don't worship the past.
Right.
And I think that's where we kind of get ourselves into trouble sometimes. So, we have this idea that if we get an influx of people, let's say they come from a congregation as we've been discussing, or something happens at a congregation that they don't agree with, and so they come to our church, and we hear sometimes, oh, you guys are really growing out there. At Oldham Lane, we have seen folks come our way because of changes that have happened, and we don't celebrate that. We don't celebrate that, somebody is coming from a place where they feel like, that they can't worship there anymore because of something's being taught, or maybe they've been bruised, or maybe they've been hurt, individually, or something of that nature. We always want to give people a place to land, but we don't celebrate anything that may have caused that. But I also think that we have this mistaken idea that that's growth. And while we always want to have our doors open and be a soft place for people to land, or be a place for visitors to come and check us out, whatever the reason you're coming through our doors are open. But at the same time, our mission is to make and grow disciples. And let's talk a little bit about the difference between swelling and growing. And and sheep swapping, because that happens a lot. Happens a lot in our community. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with swelling versus growth and sheep swapping and things of that nature? Because not only have we had people come our way from other congregations, we've had people leave ours to go to another congregation for whatever reason. And our culture, as we've already stated several times, is different than some. In Missouri, where I came from, you had to settle it. There wasn't a lot of options. There wasn't big churches all over the place, and so here it's a little bit different. If I have other options. So talk a little bit about that, handling swapping and swelling versus growth.
Well, I mean, that might be a better question for someone who's actually in church leadership, but just. I mean, from the perspective of a layperson, I've been a part of congregations that have just swollen because, I hate to say it this way, but there's kind of a sports analogy in there where whenever there's a team that's being very successful, all of a sudden there's a whole lot more fans than there used to be. And,
Yep.
and we call that the bandwagon thing. And I don't think that's an accurate description of a lot of people. But a lot of times when a congregation is doing well, if they have good leadership, they might have a dynamic minister, whatever the case may be, but they're doing well. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people want to be a part of that, especially if there's nothing necessarily wrong at their congregation, but there's nothing really all that right about it. And so they want to be a part of something that's active and that is going in the right direction. And so you can see these kind of just upswellings, but it's not because we were evangelizing to the lost. There's a lot of congregational counts in Abilene where it's like, well, we had an extra 50 people this morning, but that was 10 less from over here and 20 less from over here. And, we're all just kind of moving the same pieces on the board, but the church itself isn't necessarily growing. It, in fact, is probably shrinking.
Sure.
And so we always need to just be aware of the difference between evangelizing and bandwagoning or just being collective. We can collect a lot of saints into one congregation, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if we are not making new Christians, if we are not showing people the gospel, if we are not convincing them of their great need because we love them and we are desperate that they be saved from this lost world, then we're not doing the job of a congregation.
Yeah.
And we can be very comfortable. There's a lot of churches out there where you can have this amazing dynamic speaker and he brings in tons and tons of people, but they're not saving anyone.
Right.
He's just fun to listen to. But it all depends on how the congregation and how the leadership, how the shepherds really define success. If success is numbers, if success is people in the pews, then we can be really happy with swelling.
That's good. Yeah.
But if we quantify success as disciples are being made, those disciples are growing, people who didn't used to participate very much are now participating a lot. People who didn't used to share their faith are now growing and sharing their faith. People who didn't used to teach are now teaching. Mm-hmm. When you have a plethora of people, any position that comes open, there's multiple people who can step up and do that. When it becomes a crowded affair of, hey, somebody needs this help and you go show up and there's so many people there, you can't hardly help, it's like, well, I was superfluous here, but I better just go ahead and go, When we have those kind of things, if that's how the shepherds define success, then that's good.
Yeah.
And that's the type of success that's not going to be swayed by just a swelling from other congregations or just sheep swapping. Because what tends to happen is when you get a big influx of people from somewhere else who are just of that mentality of, hey, I just want to be where the action's happening, or, just kind of shuffling the pieces on the board, and they never really settle in any one place, well, those people aren't growing. Those people aren't going to become deeply committed. Those people aren't going to be deeply active. They're not going to be the ones who show up and are part of we have too many people to help. They're just going to be people taking up space on a pew.
Yeah.
And so I think the real danger of that is by looking at those numbers and then deciding as a shepherd, well, that means we're doing well, instead of looking at what key people and what the disciples in the congregation are actually doing with their faith and saying, that's why we're successful.
Really good point, because I think it gives a false sense of security, or it can. You say, look at how good we're doing. We got all these people coming in. And, in actuality, though, are these people that are coming in, are you encouraging them? Are you seeking to help them to grow, obviously? And then also, are you looking to plug them in? Are you helping them to take the next step in their faith? And then, have you forgotten that you still got to make disciples as well? So don't get overwhelmed by the crowd coming in and think, well, this is true success, we're good. I mean, yes, you grow the people you have, even the people that have come your way, that have placed membership with you, but also you're training them and helping them to grow and help make more disciples and getting involved in the mission of the church. And I like what you said about, just constantly moving around and never really settling in one place and the dangers of that. I told that to my kids when they went to school, when they went off to college, is, they two of them went to Harding and are still there. And I said, find a place, visit around for the first few weeks, and find a good church to settle in and be involved in. But don't go down there and for the 4 years you're there, just travel to a different one every week, just following friends or whatever. Find a place to settle and get involved, because that's the way you grow. And unfortunately, you do see that. You see a lot of just traveling around and not really settling in one place.
And that's really why swelling is going to be a false positive. We look at the swelling that's going to happen and we can say, oh, look, we must be doing really well. But if you're a congregation that the leadership and the ministry is pushing people toward discipleship and is making it clear that just being here isn't good enough.
Right.
And just being on the pew and just making this checklist, that's not good enough. God wants a return on his investment. Mm-hmm. He has given you so much. How can you give him any less? And really making it clear that, while we pay an evangelist, he's not the focal point of evangelism in the congregation. Right. We who have our faith just overflowing from us and we can't keep it contained. That's where evangelism in a congregation comes from. People who tend to float and not want to get settled in, they're not going to be comfortable in a congregation that's actually growing disciples and that's making that, it makes it an uncomfortable place to be. Now, sometimes being uncomfortable because of that makes you realize, I need to step it up.
Yeah.
You look at the preacher and you say, yeah, he's right.
Yeah.
I do have more to do. And that's a good thing. That's part of what the preacher's job is to do.
Right.
But there's going to be some people who say, I didn't come here to be made uncomfortable. And then they float somewhere else. So if you have a congregation in which, the kind of disconnected, the unmoored people can just kind of float around and, well, their boat can sit there and rock with the waves and nobody ever bothers them, then that's probably a sign that you're not really a functional congregation either.
Yeah, you said it last week, and I share this sentiment. I've thought it many times over as well, and I don't want to be that armchair quarterback that sits in the pew and just critiques what other people say, But you hear certain things that they kind of set you off, or they kind of alert you, and you and I share this sentiment, and there's nothing. There's no malice or ill intent or anything in this statement. In fact, it comes from a good place and a good heart. But how many times have you heard it, in a welcome? Thank you so much for being here, especially our visitors.
Right.
We love that you're here, and, especially our visitors. We're so thankful that you joined us today, and we are thankful that visitors join us. And we call them your honored guests, whatever. We use those phrases, but you and I think, wouldn't it be better? Maybe not say this, but you're thinking, especially our core people. Now, we love our visitors. We're glad that you came. We hope that you give us a chance to meet you and greet you, but we also hope that you'll be a core, We also hope and pray that, you stick with us, you settle here, and you become a core member here and understand what it means to be that core member and participator. Not, you're trying to get a back row spectator to be a front row participator, right? And so we say that a lot. We're thankful you're here and thankful you gathered this morning with us, especially our visitors. No, maybe the better way to say it is we're thankful you're here this morning, especially our core members, because you're the reason we're here. You're the reason we function. You're the reason we exist. You're the reason that we are who we are. And let's dig in and try to help these folks that are coming our way be engaged and involved and edified. And then let's all go out and let's reach the lost and let's make those disciples, make and grow disciples, and get involved in the mission.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those ways in which it's a harmless statement. We understand. We want to encourage visitors.
Comes from a good place.
We want to let them know that they're welcome and that we are in fact happy that they're there. But for me, when I come to church at any time, what excites me, what gives me the comfort, what gives me peace and fellowship are those locked-in people, those people who are my family, the people that I can count on, the people who are my deepest and closest friends, and the people for whom the blood of Christ is the strongest bond we could ever have, and it's the only bond that we need. We don't need to be similar or have associations in any other way. Yeah. You are my brother in Christ, and that's all that I need from you. I am especially glad to see those people. Yes. If you have a congregation in which the presence of a visitor is kind of like an alien landing, and everybody's like, "Whoa, hang on, wait! Make sure you go talk to them. Make sure Sometimes we overreact to it a little bit, but it also creates this environment where we're constantly putting out the platter to the visitor, the enticement. It's like, you need to become a member here. We want you to come in, and we're just putting everything out on a silver platter. And then as soon as somebody makes that transition to being a member, then the silver platter gets set aside, and it's like, okay, now here's all the expectations we have for you. Yep. And now it becomes, oh, you're no longer the person we're super excited to see. It's, well, if you don't show up, well, then we're going to have some questions. Why aren't you honoring the fellowship? Why aren't you doing this? And our entire mindset just kind of flip-flops instead of being able to look at a congregation and say, I am so glad you people are here. My loving family. Yeah. You are the reason we are a congregation. Right. We can't be a congregation made up of a preacher talking to empty pews or, just one or two people. We can't be a congregation fully made up of just visitors coming through town. I think one of the simultaneously most touching and yet sad experiences that I ever had was I was on a trip. I was on a very brief vacation with my family, and we, as we always do, we had looked ahead to see, well, okay, if we're going to be there on a Sunday, is there a place that we can worship? Yeah. And there was. There was a congregation right there in town. We said, well, that's going to be fantastic. And, when we showed up, for a little while, we were the only people there. Yeah. And then a guy showed up, and he had the keys to the building. But he wasn't a member. He was from a congregation outside the city. Oh. And then a guy showed up, and he was going to do the lesson, and he, in fact, conducted the entire service. I offered to help, but I was a visitor, so he was like, no. But he was a visitor, too. He was from another congregation. And it was this entire congregation was just made up of people from other places. And the reality was that there was no congregation there. Yeah. And so I really feel like we need to understand what is a congregation. We keep saying, what is the church? Well, it's the people. It is. It is. It's the people who have committed to be a part of that congregation. Right. And while we love visitors and we want visitors and we want to be a place where people are enticed to come, we want God to be that enticement. Yeah, we want the truth to be that enticement.
And how evangelistic, if that's the way to put it, is it when you see a strong family? Right. When you're a visitor, and maybe it's not evangelistic because you're a visitor that's already a Christian coming from somewhere else, moving to town or whatever, but you're looking for a church home and you walk in and the whole experience is, wow, what a family. I want to be a part of that family. When I was a kid growing up, my parents didn't always get along, and at 16 they divorced, and it was a pretty tense home life for a while there. And I remember thinking, man, if I could just be a part of my buddy Ryan's family, he has the best family and all that, and you see that when you come into a church and you go, wow, look at this family. I want to know more about this family. I want to be a part of this family because
it's a functional congregation is evangelistic. And we have completely locked off the idea of evangelism to mean reaching the lost. Well, does evangelism mean reaching the lost? Yes. Mm-hmm. But what it means is spreading the good news of Christ.
Yes.
And there's a thing that I like to call intra-church evangelism, in which that's where we are mutually edified by each other's faith.
Sure.
And we have that growth. We talk about growing disciples. Growing disciples is evangelism.
Absolutely, it is.
Teaching people the truth about God and Jesus. It is teaching people how to become closer to Him. It is demonstrating to people how being closer to God is beneficial in every way to our lives. There is nothing better than taking one more step closer to God.
Yes.
And that is evangelism. And a congregation functioning in a loving manner and having good, strong leadership and being a place where people come and see that. They see the truth of the gospel on display. It doesn't matter if you've been a Christian for 20, 30, 50 years. When you come to a congregation that is like that, that is evangelistic because it brings you closer to God. Because we can see these people who have been in dead or dying congregations. We can see people who have been in a place where all the burdens of the congregation fall on their shoulders. And the longer they stay, that just gets worse. More and more burdens get put on their shoulders. And then it becomes harder to leave because, well, it's like, I was the one card holding this house of cards together, and I'm shaking under the weight. And what's happening is other people in the congregation look around and say, oh, he's got it, and that card bails out. And all of a sudden, I'm holding it up even more. And it becomes even more dangerous for you to go. When those people can come to a congregation that is the way God designed it to be, that is doing their utmost to be what God wants us to be, that is evangelistic, and that is an outreach that is going to bring people closer to God. I come to church on Sundays, I come to Bible classes on Wednesdays because I want to be brought closer to God.
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that I've been a Christian for so many years, every day I want to get closer to God.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful way to put it. To kind of wrap all this up and kind of put a little bow on it, I think that's the message for someone who is leaving a congregation for whatever reason and looking for a new congregation to be a part of. There are certain things, like you mentioned earlier, maybe a strong youth group for my child. Perhaps I'm looking for some other extracurriculars or, peripheral things, but at the heart of it, I'm searching for a place that will feed me the truth and that I can dive into, be involved with, and really, become a participator in a functional family. And, I think too often, I say too often, that's probably not fair, but I think what we see a lot of times is, folks that they want to come in, they want to, do their duty of coming to church on Sunday and leave and not really be bothered too much. And there's just nothing biblical about that. What we should be looking for if we're changing congregations is a church that we can dive in, get involved with, and be a doer. And, as a church family, that's what we should be striving to be, is a place that will grow you, help you to be, like you said, one step closer to God every time you come in. I always say that every time you come to worship, you should walk away changed. You should walk out of here with hope. You should walk away changed. I use a lot of sports analogies as a former coach. This is kind of this is your hype or your pep talk for the week, and you leave here and now you're ready to take on the world and take on the week because, it's easy in here. It's easy when you come together with your family to be spiritual. It's not so easy for many people out in the world. They're leaving church and they're going into a world that's very dark and their job's very dark or their family's dark, and trying to make a difference. We're getting you ready to do that and to help people to come to Christ and to make a difference in their lives. So all those things said, leaving a church is difficult. Finding a good church is difficult. But
just thinking about what you were just saying, when we come together, part of that mutual edification is it's a weekly or hopefully daily constant reminder that God has everything we need.
Mm-hmm.
He has provided everything we need, and not just in some long off way of, one day I'll be with him and then I'll have everything I need. No, I have everything I need right now.
Yes.
And for a whole lot of people, that doesn't happen when they go to church.
Right.
When they meet with their family, they're not getting what they need. And they are not being shown that God has everything that they need.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a failure. It is a difficulty. It is something that is very difficult to overcome. And for people who find themselves in those circumstances, I think we need to make sure that we are trying to help people how to make those kind of decisions and make sure people aren't like, somebody said something that bothered me, I'm out the door, but you're not going to go talk to that person. You're not going to try and make it right. You're not going to make sure that you understood what they were talking about.
Right.
Being in one of those situations where you think the congregation is going the wrong way or that it's dead or something, but you've never talked to the shepherds about it if you have shepherds.
Yeah.
You've never let them shepherd you.
Yeah.
You've been in a circumstance where, this congregation's just not meeting my needs. They don't know and care about me. Have you talked to the shepherds? Do they know that you're hurting?
Yeah.
Because you might be one person among several, and unfortunately, a lot of congregations have a lot of squeaky wheels. They have a lot of fires that have to be put out, and they're just men. They're just humans. Yeah. They may not know that you're hurting. Yeah. You need to open yourself up to be shepherded. You need to open yourself up and make sure that they know the needs that you have. And if despite all of that, you need to go somewhere where you can be shown that God has everything that you need then to apply those same principles there.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go to that new congregation and be open to be shepherded.
Right.
You need to go to that new congregation and make sure people know who you are and make sure that they know that you're there to serve, and make sure that you are doing what is your responsibility as part of the family.
Sure.
If you're looking for a place to hide, a new congregation's not going to be that.
Yeah.
And if it is, it's not a congregation you should be a part of.
Right.
You should be looking for a place that's going to demonstrate daily that God has everything that I need.
Mm-hmm.
And as difficult as that decision might be, I need to leave this place and come to this place. And then it's kind of like, doubling down. We keep making sports analogies, which is really weird because I'm not really a big sporting guy. But I've always had a running joke with a friend of mine that when it comes to a sports team, you get one time to change who you're a fan of.
Right.
And that makes it hard coming, when I was a kid, the Raiders was the team in LA, and that wasn't all that great to be a Raiders fan, but then they kept hopping from different cities and all over the place and everything. But I don't get to just decide, I'm a fan of this team. Now I'm going to be a fan of this team. I always told my friend, no, you get once, and then you have to be committed to that new team.
Right.
I'm not saying that's absolutely the case, but when you do change to a new congregation, when you find that place that you want to land, you need to be committed to it.
I agree.
You need to give it everything that you've got to make sure that you're not the reason the last congregation failed.
Yeah, we say it all the time. Don't give the minimum and expect the maximum. You've said it before. In so many other areas of life, we don't expect perfection. We don't demand it. In politics, we'll overlook a lot if he agrees with me on 2 or 3 issues. If the candidate agrees with me on 2 or 3 core issues, I'll overlook just about anything else. I don't care if he's immoral and all that, but if he stands for the right things, that I believe in, then, or maybe even one right thing, then I'm good, and there's a lot of other areas we're like that. But when it comes to church, it seems like, nope, perfection. You got to be perfect in every area. If somebody doesn't say hi to me, or if somebody, if I don't get my way on this or that, then, I'm out. And, I think we know that's not a healthy attitude. Don't give the minimum and expect the maximum, right?
And just be full of gratitude and grace.
Yeah.
It's much easier to have a loving and fulfilling relationship with your fellow Christians in a congregation if you truly are thankful for them. It's real easy, like you said, to be that armchair quarterback who then sits in the pew and he's like, oh, that could have been said better.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not what he meant to say. Or, oh man, did you hear that prayer and this and that? Oh, did you hear what he said as the welcome? He said the visitors were better. We can say those kind of things, but there have been times when I've been a part of a service and like I've passed trays or I've done whatever, and for whatever reason, I've had a moment where I'm standing in the back of the congregation. And there's a moment when you can kind of look at everybody who's there and your heart can really be touched with just gratitude for every single one of those people.
Yeah.
And just recognizing, that guy, that lady, they're not getting up and doing the things that I'm doing, but they're trying harder than I am to be right with God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And just being thankful for everyone that you see there and everything that they're doing. You can see the love they have for God. You can see their passion in worship. And just having that heart of gratitude, it makes you love those people all the more. It makes you thankful for them. And then it makes it so easy to give them grace. Mm-hmm. And when things, get messy because it's a family environment, we can say, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
That happens in family. But God has given us everything we need to get through it. He has given us the perfect plan. Right. It's being executed by imperfect people, but He has given us the perfect plan. We just need to work together to give each other grace to say, well, let's get back on the plan.
Yeah, a perfect family with imperfect people. Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you, Sam. We could talk all day, and I don't know that I mind that, but appreciate everybody for tuning in, and please spread the news about the podcast. We're on Spotify, iTunes, and the different platforms, YouTube, Facebook. And if you have a question for me or Sam, email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. We'd be glad to, read your email, answer any questions you might have and any comments you might have. You guys are so good about commenting and letting us know how much you appreciate the podcast, and we thank you for that as well. And Sam, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll have you back on soon. Appreciate you guys for joining us. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.